The Made in India vaccine, Covaxin, continues to run into one controversy after the other. The World Health Organization has now put a pause on the supplies by Bharat Biotech, the manufacturers of Covaxin, to the UN agencies. We'll take you inside that story on Mojo Story this evening as we revisit what's happening with the COVID vaccine rollout in India. Remember, we still do not have the implementation of booster shots. This, as the World Health Organization, while underlining that there is no safety issue with Covaxin, has asked for an upgradation of production facilities at the manufacturing plants of Covaxin. Bharat Biotech has responded by saying this does not impact its certification in any way and has also argued that there are, in fact, no orders pending with any of the WHO or UN affiliated countries, and their main market continues to be India. But this is not the first controversy to have plagued Covaxin. How do we understand this latest controversy, this at a time when the debate around whether India should have booster shots continues to rage on? Let's introduce our panel of experts today. We're joined by Dr. Vineeta Bal, senior scientist and virologist. Thank you very much, ma'am. Dr. Lancelot Pinto is with us. He's at the Hinduja Hospital in Mumbai. Dr. Swapneil Parikh, physician and author, is with us as well. And from the Indian Medical Association, we're joined today by its president, Dr. Jayalal. Welcome, everybody, to the program. Let me start with you, Dr. Vineeta, if I may. The World Health Organization has stressed, and therefore we should too, that this does not mean A, that there's anything unsafe about Covaxin, B, that anyone who's had the Covaxin shots needs to worry about. The certification continues to be valid. So, how do we understand this pause and the demand for an upgradation of facilities and good practices at the plants?
Uh, for me, also, it is very difficult to figure out because I haven't read what the actual comments are. But based on these comments, that the safety is not an issue, production is the only issue, which means that the technology which is used or the instrumentation which is used is likely to be considered outdated or maybe somewhat at risk of maybe contamination and so on and so forth. That's how I would guess it, because I haven't seen the actual details, and WHO hasn't possibly provided them or made them public. But at the same time, all one can say is that the manufacturing process, which is quite a complicated process, and it is also true that the Bharat Biotech had changed, had used earlier or generated their plants to produce polio or some other viral vaccines, which were repurposed for the production of Covaxin. So obviously there might have been some minor compromises about which again I'm not aware of because these are the technical details. So that is something that I would think of. But it is true that every manufacturing process becomes somewhat dated. I wouldn't necessarily say outdated, but dated, and hence the upgradation might be required. That is how I see it without really getting into the nitty gritty, since I haven't found the nitty gritty details. Are you showing us the nitty gritty? Then I can look at it and
Well,
possibly comment.
there's actually not a lot of detail available. We've been trying to look for it as well. We have one statement from Bharat Biotech, a kind of summary statement from the World Health Organization. It seems to be, as you said, related to more practices followed in production, which they would like to see an improvement in. Bharat Biotech is retaliating by saying we actually are not even supplying to these countries, so anymore. So we don't understand what the fuss is about. Let me bring in Swapnil at this point. Covaxin has run into one or the other problem with the WHO. Its approvals came in very late. Some of it is because its phase 3 trial data was put into the public domain quite late, and there were questions around its data. But is it also to do with the nature of the vaccine? It is in the end a conventional vaccine. It probably takes the longest, as it were, therefore, to assemble and roll out, and therefore Covaxin volumes have also been a problem even within the domestic context. Swapnil.
Hi, Barkha. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, I'd like to echo the uncertainty expressed initially by Dr. Bal. There's not a lot that we do know about the specific issues. What we do know is that there's been the good manufacturing practices that are supposed to be in place, that there's been some deficiency in that. To kind of explain what that would mean is there is a certain protocol or certain standards that have to be followed when you're manufacturing vaccines and pharmaceutical products. And that's there as a preventive measure to prevent adulteration, contamination, errors in inactivation, any error that could impact the process of making the vaccine. So those are important that they're there. What Bharat Biotech has come back and said is that the end product, the safety tests that have been performed on that, the end product is okay. And that is likely the case. That's very likely the case that the product has not been impacted. But that's like me driving a car without a license or with an expired license. And when I get pulled over, saying, hey, I didn't actually break any traffic rules, I just didn't have a valid license. So it's important. It's there. There's a sieve-like mechanism where there are multiple layers that are supposed to catch errors in manufacturing to safeguard the end user. And I think the fact that this isn't in place and it hasn't been in place is something that we should look at. We also need to keep in mind that this can be a slippery slope, as we saw with the restricted emergency use authorization that was given to Covaxin. Yes, it was an emergency situation. Yes, we needed vaccines. But following that, even when there hasn't been an emergency situation, we've seen other vaccines go down the same way and get these authorizations without any public data. So in this instant, maybe the vaccine was okay. But is this going to lead us down a pathway where we find manufacturers don't have these best practices in place, and that's just going to be okay, that we're going to accept that in India? By the way, other countries don't. There are some countries like in the US where they would crack down very, very heavily on something like this. It would be treated as a defective product, not because the product is actually defective, but because the manufacturing practices that are supposed to be in place weren't in place.
That's very interesting, and I'll take that to the IMA president in just a moment. But I want to bring in Dr. Pinto here, because listening to Swapneil's analogy of driving a car without a license, a Bharat Biotech official anonymously told the Business Standard that the only problem that WHO has, he actually likened it to how a car driving up a hill is a sedan, whereas it would be better served if it were an SUV. This is actually the analogy that was given by a Bharat Biotech official who did not wish to be named. Is that an acceptable sort of variation, or is it, as Swapneil is arguing, more grave than that, and something that we need to be asking a lot more questions about, Dr. Pinto?
Hi, Barkha. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on the show. I think that when it comes to vaccination, there is no felt need, right? A person is not ill, a person is well, and you're asking them to take a jab when they're feeling absolutely fine. I think the standards tend to be a lot higher in a situation like this, when when trust needs to be at the maximum. And I think these kind of confusions related to the trustworthiness of something create a lot of problem. Now, I'm not an expert when it comes to standards, but I do believe that if there are standards in place, there must be a reason. I do know about some instances where contaminations have happened in the past. So there was the famous polio contamination. The polio virus was not inactivated enough, and that led to an outbreak of polio among individuals. This was, of course, if I remember right, it was in the 1960s or so. But I think contaminations have happened after that with rotavirus at some point of time, with yellow fever virus vaccination at some point of time. And that's how these measures were put into place, to make sure that even if it's a rare instance, it should not happen, especially in a context where you're giving an individual who's well a vaccine. And you definitely don't want to create a problem in that kind of a situation. So if we do agree that these standards are there for a reason, and we do subject our companies being inspected by the WHO, we in a way endorse the fact that these inspections are important. So if on one hand we do that, and then on the other hand say that these inspections are not important, I think it just leads to a lot of confusion among the end users, as among the clinicians, among patients, among individuals who are going to get vaccinated, who don't have the expertise to know the difference between the two. So therefore, we subject ourselves to certain standards. And I think we should not trivialize these standards as a result.
Dr. Jayalal, if I can bring you in, but then it is also incumbent upon the World Health Organization to perhaps be a little more detailed and a little more specific about what, in fact, is the gap. Where was the gap? What did they find at their inspection? Because right now, literally, we don't know anything except for the fact that it asks for an upgradation in facilities. How do you see this on behalf of the IMA? We've also seen a certain degree of prickliness in India when it comes to Covaxin because it is a home developed and a home manufactured vaccine. So, every time questions are asked about it, Indians get very prickly. In fact, there have been politicians who've accused the WHO of bias. How do you see this debate, Dr. Jayalal?
Absolutely true, because we are now living in a scientific era. What everyone expects is a transparency. Unfortunately, in the COVID era, what we see either the ICMR, WHO, all of them trying to bring something into their back file, not putting it in the transparency level, and that is what exactly happening now also. Covaxin is had a bitter experience in the past. Only in November 3rd, WHO given that approval. We are using from the January. That is a long time it has taken for the WHO to give that approval. If you see, there are various incidents that taken place. Once the Brazilian government very openly said we are not happy with the GMB practice or the good manufacturing practice in the Covaxin, and they even said to the level of documentation is not good, your sterilization is not good, your viral neutralization is not good. So that they put out in a paper saying that why that country is not accepting this practice. But after that, going through all these things, Covaxin, the company has upgraded that. WHO has given a nod. It is only in November. But within another 3 months, and if they are taking another inspection and saying that the standard practice is not good, and that little is upsetting. But I'm sure the biotech has taken it in a positive sense, and they have said whatever personally they would have communicated, they are going to upgrade that. But the good thing is, whatever the people, millions of people who have got, 98 countries has received the Covaxin earlier. So the end result, there is nothing to worry about the safety, nothing to worry about the efficacy. They quoted the efficacy is more than 78%. That is much better than what we expected. So this is only a temporary setback, which we need to take it in a positive sense. The company has to approach, because it's not only taking the ownership of the biotech, but it is only the pride of entire India. That we are saying that India is becoming the vaccine hub for the whole world. And if there is something issues like coming out of this, that will be a big challenge. So I think biotech and the government will work to see that we will be able to get over the license very soon.
So you are, of course, pushing for more transparency, not just from biotech, but also from the World Health Organization. And I think that's an important point, Dr. Vineeta Bal, that actually the WHO hasn't explained this, and if yes, I agree with Dr. Pinto and Dr. Parikh that, we have opened up our facilities to WHO inspection, and therefore we should respect that. But I think as citizens, as Indians, as anyone who may have been administered Covaxin, we have a right to know more.
I agree. But this is a usual problem that even many of the Indian government high level committees also give one liner responses for public consumption. And the good practice would be, even if there is only one liner for public consumption, the concerned party should be given the input in detail so that whatever problems there are should be rectifiable. And I hope WHO has done that, because what you were showing on the screen was a statement put out by WHO, which wasn't giving any details. But if look at it this way, if Bharat Biotech has to improve on certain things to become acceptable for WHO, okay, then what is it that is expected should be conveyed to the Bharat Biotech. So I'm sure probably WHO has given much more information, much more nuanced, detailed demands to Bharat Biotech, and neither WHO nor Bharat Biotech are willing to say it out. This is complete speculation. I do not have any evidence. I was not involved in any of these processes, but this is something that I can imagine. So there would be an not informal, there would be a formal private communication based on which Bharat Biotech may need to improvise on this, that, and the other. And if Bharat Biotech is saying it's going to take 6 months to 8 months or something because they will need upgradation of the equipment, at least that much we know, because that is what their statement said. that equipment cannot be bought and installed and made functional in a day or two. So obviously, at least that is conveyed. And what those equipments are, because is it to grow the virus? Is it to kill the virus? What is it that is required? And all of these plants would need some time for buying, installation, validation before the real manufacture can happen. And you must
Yeah.
be aware that Bharat Biotech was not able to produce as much of Covaxin as was needed. And that is why Indian Immunologicals Limited and couple of other public sector organizations were roped in. Even there, the important point was that are they capable of coming up to the standards that are required, so that the bulk vaccine which is produced by one of these companies, at least in Indian Immunologicals, has been providing to Bharat Biotech. That is something that we know. Others are probably in the pipeline. But whether that quality control is there or not, we are as a country very poor and sort of, uncaring about quality control. So
Yeah.
failure in quality control is something that would not surprise me. But in this particular situation, even I don't know what is the real story.
So let's, Swapnil, break this down for people who are not doctors. They're looking at this WHO statement and they are seeing the WHO argue that this vaccine is completely safe. The vaccine's efficacy remains unquestioned, but there's something missing in its manufacturing process or systems. How would they understand? How would a lay person who has been administered the vaccine understand that? We have to also remember that while this is not so much the problem in India, vaccine hesitancy, anti-vaxxers are a real thing, and every such controversy just emboldens that group, that voice much further.
Barkha, so just to remind everyone, when there was a delay in the WHO's emergency use listing of Covaxin, one of the reasons at that time too pertained to inspection of the good manufacturing practices for Covaxin. So this isn't entirely a new or unexpected issue. To explain this, to try and explain this to non-doctors, non-scientists. Well, let's imagine you manage to walk through a tunnel with blades hanging, with axes hanging over your head, and you make it to the other side fine. So you come out and say that, hey, I got through this tunnel and nothing happened to me. It's not that nothing happened to you, and nothing did happen. Nothing bad happened with Covaxin. It was a good vaccine. It was effective. The question is, should you be walking with the threat of a blade hanging over your head? These practices are in place to protect us. And yes, nothing bad happened, but it could have. The risk of it happening when these best practices aren't followed is higher. Just to go back to the analogy of the sedan going up the hill, well, maybe they want a four-wheel drive going up the hill because, a sedan is going to roll backwards and harm the people sitting inside. So sometimes
Yeah.
these processes are there for a reason. And if other countries take it, and, it's not just Bharat Biotech's fault here. If these practices are taken so seriously in other countries, why are they not taken seriously in India? Just coming back to the transparency issue, I think there has certainly been a lot that we could have done better when it comes to transparency with our vaccines, from the manufacturers, from regulators across the board. But the WHO may have certain commitments to confidentiality when they inspect a manufacturing facility. They may not just be able to put out statements. There may be a requirement that they are supposed to submit a formal report to the manufacturer, and then the manufacturer is supposed to clarify what went wrong, which really hasn't been forthcoming.
Yeah. Dr. Jayalal, do you want to respond to that? Because you spoke about an absence of transparency even from the World Health Organization.
This is nothing to do with the manufacturer and WHO. This is the user. The end user is the common man, and they cannot have a personal communication whether this vaccine is good and they say it is not good, and you make arrangements. Till then, the common man cannot suffer. So the transparency, whatever may be, there is a condition which is blocking WHO. It is mandatorily required till it is on use. If they say that it is not good for exporting, then what is the use of it in India? Or we that is much inferior to that one? It is the common source of it. It is a pride of our country. So I don't think it can be personally communicated to that is good, but this should be made public. Our CDSC also should take it to noted, and they should do some proper verification, on the field verification, and they should give a certificate today to the Indian people that this vaccine production is in a good status and nothing to be worried. That will be the transparency attitude what we are expecting. The Ministry of Health should step in and do controlling measures for this.
I think I think that's an important point, that irrespective of whether these vaccines are being supplied or not to UN agencies, and Bharat Biotech has argued it's not, Dr. Pinto, Dr. Jayalal makes the important point that as an Indian, you're looking at this and saying if there's a gap in the manufacturing process, then whether or not you are exporting these or selling them outside or gifting them outside, they're being used in India. And is there something that, as an Indian, I need to know or worry about? Maybe there isn't. But how do we know?
No, I couldn't agree more. And I noticed that it was a little odd to say that, but it doesn't affect us because we don't export. But what about, what about your duty towards India, where you need to explain it to Indians that they've received this vaccine, and these are the issues that are raised, and listen, we are supplying this to the country. They've done a great job. I mean, they produced a lot of vaccine in a really short time, and that's impressive. But at the same time, you owe your end users, just as was rightly said, you owe your end users a certain explanation. And these safety measures are added for rare events, by and large. When you talk about even the analogy that's often given in medicine is the airline industry, right, where every check is in place to avoid these rare events which might happen when there's error, when there's something goes wrong. So when you're talking about when somebody comes and asks me, okay, this is a problem now, there's an announcement that the WHO has a quality control issue. I mean, one way I tell them is, listen, they're protecting you from a rare event. But if the patient asks me, what if I have that rare event, which the system is designed to protect me against, I don't think I really have an answer unless there is a transparency around, what was flagged. And there's an assurance from the company saying that, listen, these things were flagged, but these things will still possibly not affect even a rare event. So I think it's a double standard to say, yes, we don't export to other countries, but, it's okay to sell the same in India.
Yeah, just in concluding, brief remarks from Swapneil and Dr. Vineeta Bal. Swapneil, what would you want Bharat Biotech to be saying to the people of India right now that would ease this conversation?
I think the best thing is prevention, like a vaccine is meant to do. Don't let these controversies keep happening. Ensure that you do what you're supposed to do. Be transparent from the outset, so you're not playing damage control with something as sensitive as a vaccine all the time. The point you brought out about vaccine hesitancy, anti-vaxxers taking advantage of such a situation is an important one. I think at the very least, what we need to understand what the failures were, why they happened, why the good manufacturing practices weren't followed, and what measures have been taken to rectify this and prevent this from happening in the future. And more importantly, I think we need to see something done by the regulators, where we see them saying that these safeguards are there for a reason, and yes, they may be the WHO safeguards, but maybe we need to do some introspection and say that if other countries take these safeguards so seriously, maybe we should also. So I think that's equally important.
Dr. Vineeta, I think Dr. Pinto explained that these might be for outlier events. There's that absolute ultimate sort of safety grid that is followed. But as Dr. Jayalal said, that the priority should be the end user. The priority cannot be the agreements between WHO and Bharat Biotech and so on.
So I'll bring in one more point before I answer that. For example, this is simply a hypothetical example, that say if there is contamination, because as these manufacturing plants were supposed to be used for either rotavirus or poliovirus or some such vaccine production, say there is a contamination. Currently, forget about the adults. I mean, I'm not keep saying that they are less important, but Covaxin is the only vaccine which is being given to 15 to 18-year-olds. So they have a long life, and we were talking about healthy individuals getting vaccines. So the quality of vaccine should be even more than those for the drugs, because drugs are meant for sick people and vaccines are meant for healthy people. So
Yeah.
especially if they are for 15 to 18-year-olds, we do need to have even more assurance that they are really, really safe. They were shown to be safe, and maybe they are still safe. But the point that I would like to make is that maybe there is this agreement and there is a restriction on WHO that they will not make public whatever their comments are. Fair enough.
Yeah.
They are the controlling agency or regulatory agency internationally. But is it possible for Bharat Biotech to say it is they are at fault, quote unquote fault, I'm saying, meaning whatever the deficit. So these were the deficits which were pointed out. They are minor, they are not related to this, that, and the other, and hence our vaccine production has the same quality which was there. Something along those lines, Bharat Biotech should be able to explain to allay fears of the ordinary people,
Yeah.
because tomorrow onwards, the 15 to 18-year-olds may smack their parents since they can't give the
That that
consent.
that is actually a great point. And Dr. Jayalal and Dr. Pinto, if you want to comment briefly on that, that this is not only about adults, this is actually about teenagers. Dr. Jayalal.
And the WHO in their notice, they have very well said it is up to the government of the particular country to take what appropriate action they have to take. So that they have very clearly said that they have passed the buck to the government of India. So now the Central Drug Control Society should take action on that. It is not we expect the biotech to come out and what they say. Maybe when it is when they say, people may not believe that. So our drug controller or our government should have a in situ or the online inspection on that area, have the assess in their manufacturing practice and make it transparent to the people that we have inspected and they are upgrading and there is nothing to be worried. And if that statement comes from the government, because WHO has already passed the buck to the respective governments to take appropriate action. So I am sure the government will do that, and we are expecting that from the government in India.
Fair enough. Dr. Pinto, I think the point that we all overlooked till the end, that we are also talking about under 18s, who may have concerns. Again, I want to underline the WHO statement does not question the safety or the efficacy of Covaxin, but it does not elaborate on what other gaps it has found in terms of best practices.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the liability is a lot more when it comes to younger individuals who, again, we already know that the risk of severe disease with COVID is extremely low. Then you make them take a vaccine which is protecting you against a rare occurrence, and then expose them to something that's potentially a rare event again. But still, why would you want to expose somebody young? So I think, but the point that's also brought up is extremely important. There is a conflict of interest when you make a manufacturer come out with a statement defending their manufacturing process, which is why you need a third-party regulator. And hopefully the regulator will clarify the situation and reassure parents all across the country as well that their kids are safe.
Well, as they say, it's an old cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. It's truth quotient. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Transparency, the more we know, the less we will worry, is a trope that never fails. And I hope that does happen and that more questions are asked. There's a certain degree of pandemic fatigue that sets in cycles, and so people don't ask the questions that need to be asked. But here we do keep trying to ask those questions. Dr. Pinto, Dr. Bal, Dr. Parikh, Dr. Jayalal, thank you. And to our audience, thank you for watching. See you soon.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.